Before 1543, the battlefields of Japan were filled with familiar sounds. The clash of swords, the whistle of arrows, and the thunder of cavalry hooves dominated the landscape of war. Samurai warriors, the elite fighting class, were masters of the bow and the blade. Their entire way of life, their code of honor, known as Bushido, was deeply connected to these traditional weapons. Combat was often a series of individual duels, where skill with a spear or a sword determined victory. The samurai's armor was designed to protect against sharp edges and piercing arrowheads. This was the established order of warfare, practiced for centuries during Japan's long period of internal conflict, the Sengoku Jidai or Warring States period. This traditional world of combat was about to be changed forever. In the summer of 1543, a Chinese ship was caught in a powerful storm. It was blown far off its intended course and eventually found its way to the shores of a small Japanese island called Tanegashima, located south of the main island of Kyushu. On board this vessel were several Portuguese adventurers. They were among the first Europeans to ever set foot in Japan. The local lord, Tanegashima Tokitaka, was curious about these strange visitors with their unusual clothing and foreign language. He greeted them, unaware that they carried with them a technology that would completely reshape the future of his country and the destiny of the samurai. The Portuguese travelers carried with them a new and terrifying weapon, the matchlock musket, or arquebus. To demonstrate its power, one of the Portuguese men took aim at a target. The local Japanese people watched in a mixture of fear and amazement. There was a loud bang, a cloud of smoke, and a flash of fire. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard before. It was a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very ground. When the smoke cleared, they saw that the projectile had easily pierced the target from a great distance. They could not comprehend how this simple metal tube could produce such a destructive and effortless result. The Japanese observers were immediately captivated by this powerful device. They called it the Tanegashima, after the island where it first appeared. Lord Tokitaka was particularly impressed. He understood instantly that this weapon could give him a significant advantage over his rivals. An arrow could be dodged, and a sword could be parried. But this weapon fired a projectile that was too fast to see and too powerful for traditional armor to stop. It did not require years of dedicated training like the bow or the sword. A common soldier could be taught to use it effectively in a relatively short amount of time, a fact that held immense implications for the structure of Japanese armies. Lord Tanegashima Tokitaka was not content to simply marvel at the new weapon. He was a practical leader who saw its immense potential. He purchased 2 of the matchlocks from the Portuguese merchants for a very high price. His goal was not just to own these guns, but to understand and replicate them. He immediately ordered his best swordsmith, a man named Yaita Kinbei Kiyosada, to study the weapons and create copies. The task was incredibly difficult. Japanese craftsmen were masters of metalworking, renowned for forging the world's finest swords. However, the internal mechanics of the firearm presented a completely new set of challenges that they had never encountered before. The most difficult part of the gun to copy was the screw mechanism used to seal the breech plug at the back of the barrel. Japanese smiths did not have the technology to create a functioning screw. The barrel itself was also a problem. It needed to be drilled with precision to ensure it could withstand the explosive force of the gunpowder without bursting. For months, Yaita and his team worked tirelessly, attempting to solve these complex engineering puzzles. Their initial efforts failed, but their determination did not waver. They understood that unlocking the secrets of this weapon was crucial for the future security and power of their domain. The pressure to succeed was immense. The solution came in an unexpected way. According to legend, a Portuguese blacksmith arrived in Japan the following year. Lord Tokitaka arranged for his own daughter, Wakasa, to be married to the foreign smith in exchange for the secret of creating the screw. Whether this story is entirely true or not, the Japanese smiths eventually learned the necessary techniques. They mastered the process of drilling the barrel and, crucially, how to forge the vital screw mechanism. This breakthrough was the turning point. Once Yaida and his team understood the core principles, their incredible skill in metalworking allowed them to not only copy the Portuguese design, but to begin improving upon it. Within a decade of that first encounter on the shores of Tanegashima, the production of firearms exploded across Japan. The knowledge spread rapidly from the island to other parts of the country, particularly to the manufacturing centers of Sakai and Kunitomo. Japanese smiths began to refine the design, creating lighter, more reliable, and more accurate weapons than the original Portuguese models. They developed better firing mechanisms and improved the quality of the barrels. By the 1560s, Japan was producing thousands of matchlocks every year. They were no longer simply copying a foreign weapon. They had made it their own, adapting it to their own needs and manufacturing capabilities with astonishing speed and ingenuity. The introduction and mass production of the Tanegashima matchlock fundamentally altered the nature of warfare in Japan. The age of heroic individual combat between highly skilled samurai began to fade. The new reality of the battlefield was dominated by formations of ashigaru, or common foot soldiers, armed with firearms. A daimyo's power was no longer measured just by the number of elite samurai he commanded, but by the number of guns he could bring to a battle. This change represented a major social and military shift. Peasants and low-ranking soldiers, once considered secondary to the mounted samurai, now held the power to defeat the most seasoned warrior from a safe distance. Military tactics had to adapt quickly and dramatically. Generals began to develop new strategies that revolved around the use of volley fire. This tactic involved arranging musketeers in deep ranks. The first rank would fire, then retreat to the back to reload, while the next rank stepped forward to fire their own volley. This created a continuous and devastating storm of lead that was nearly impossible for traditional cavalry or infantry charges to break through. Armies also began to build more sophisticated field fortifications, like wooden palisades and earthen mounds, to protect their gunners from enemy attacks while they reloaded their slow-firing weapons. The battlefield became a more organized and far deadlier place. One of the most famous and decisive examples of this new form of warfare was the Battle of Nagashino in 1575. The combined forces of Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu faced the formidable cavalry of the Takeda clan, led by Takeda Katsuyori. The Takeda cavalry was legendary, considered the most powerful in all of Japan. Nobunaga, however, was a brilliant and innovative strategist who fully embraced the power of the firearm. He assembled a force of approximately 3,000 ashigaru armed with Tanegashima matchlocks and positioned them behind staggered wooden fences alongside a river, creating a strong defensive line that would disrupt a cavalry charge. As the proud Takeda cavalry charged, they were met not with spears and swords, but with a relentless and coordinated volley of gunfire. The ranks of Oda's gunners fired in succession, mowing down the charging horses and riders wave after wave. The Takeda samurai, despite their incredible bravery and skill, were powerless against the hail of bullets. Their famous cavalry charge was completely shattered. The battle was a resounding victory for Oda Nobunaga and demonstrated beyond any doubt that the firearm had become the deciding factor in Japanese warfare. The era of the sword and spear as the primary weapons of war was officially over. The influence of the Tanegashima matchlock did not end with the unification of Japan under the Tokugawa shogunate in the early 1600s. After a century of intense civil war, Japan entered a long period of peace and relative isolation known as the Edo period. During this time, the government strictly controlled the production and ownership of firearms to maintain social order and prevent regional lords from rising up in rebellion. The samurai, seeking to preserve their status and identity, once again elevated the sword as the status symbol of their class, referring to it as the soul of the samurai. The gun was seen as a less honorable weapon, fit for common soldiers but not for true warriors. However, the Tanegashima was not forgotten or abandoned. While large-scale battles ceased, the skills of gunsmithing and marksmanship were carefully preserved. Firearms remained a part of military training for the samurai, even if they were not used in open conflict. The shogunate and various domains maintained armories filled with matchlocks, understanding their importance for national defense should the need ever arise. Gunsmiths continued to practice their craft, passing their knowledge down through generations. This created a foundation of technical skill that would prove to be incredibly valuable centuries later, when Japan was forced to modernize. The long period of isolation came to an abrupt end in the mid-19th century with the arrival of Western powers, most notably Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States in 1853. Faced with the threat of superior Western military technology, Japan was forced to rapidly modernize its army and industry during the Meiji Restoration. The nation's long history with the Tanegashima proved to be a significant advantage. Unlike other nations that had no prior experience with firearms, Japan had a pre-existing culture of gun manufacturing and a population that understood the basic principles of firearms. This historical knowledge provided a crucial head start. The old matchlock smiths and their descendants were able to adapt their skills to produce more modern rifles and artillery. The principles of metalworking, barrel drilling, and creating firing mechanisms, first learned from the Portuguese in the 16th century, were now applied to the challenges of the 19th century. Therefore, the Tanegashima matchlock represents more than just an old weapon. It was the critical first step in Japan's journey with firearms technology. It transformed the country's medieval warfare, was preserved through a long era of peace, and ultimately provided the foundational knowledge that enabled Japan's swift and successful transition into a modern industrial and military power before 1900.